First and foremost, welcome to the session on digital assessment, where we're going to look at how we use Quizlet for content consolidation. Now, before we go on, in the email that I sent you, I asked you to get the Quizlet app. I don't know if some of you might have started exploring it a little already, played around with what it can do. But today we're going to be looking at both just the physical workings of Quizlet, but more importantly, the application of it, how we can actually use it in our classroom to as a tool for content consolidation specifically. Now, before we dive into that, we need to discuss a little bit of the theoretical underpinnings of what we want to achieve in today's session. So bear with me. We're going to go through some theory first, just to understand how we want to use this whole system or this tool in our way of teaching. The first thing that I think is very important to understand whenever we start looking at any form of digital assessment is understanding the difference between formative assessment and summative assessment. Now, in a very simplified way of looking at it, and it becomes a lot more complicated than just that, I often look at it a little bit. Formative assessment is very much a learner focus. Now, obviously, learning in general is going to be a learner focused thing. Formative assessment, there's a big learner focus on this, whereas summative assessment, the teacher plays a much bigger role in this whole process. So this is why we've split them in this way. But what one has to understand, formative assessment, the whole goal of formative assessment is to create an upwards trajectory in learning. It is about going through what you've learned, assessing whether or not you know it, and then as we move ahead with the learning process, gaining mastery in the content. That is the purpose of formative assessment. The whole function of when we look at sorry, what's happening here? Right. When we look at summative assessment is not about necessarily the same thing. However, we can use it in this way. But summative assessment is essentially in assessing whether the learner has mastered the subject or has mastered the content. So formative assessment is all about supporting the mastery of the content, whereas summative assessment is essentially in testing whether this content has been mastered. Now, in this regards, this is where e-learning can play an incredibly powerful role within your education. That's why we want to look at how Quizlet can be used as a tool that transforms the way that we go about things and not just an add-on to what we do. It actually changes the game quite a bit if we use it in the correct manner. So formative assessment is when we want to use formative assessment, this is where e-learning and the use of digital technologies can play a vital role. Whereas in summative assessment, yes, we can do summative assessment on on digital platforms as well, but very often summative assessment in a simplified way is more the traditional way of assessment that we're used to. Not saying that you can't use new interesting technologies in summative assessment, but very often we are quite used to summative assessment being a pen and paper approach. Now, an analogy that I've always liked when trying to understand the concept of formative assessment and summative assessment, and those of you who've delved into e-learning, I'm sure would have come across this before, but just simply put, the soup analogy when we look at this is formative assessment is when the chef tastes the soup and makes adjustments while he is making the soup, he or she is making the soup. So in order to be able to make food and make good food, it is vital that we taste as we go along. We can do it on purely our gut and our intuition, but it's likely to be better if we don't just use our gut and intuition. Whereas when we're looking at summative assessment, this is when the diner actually tastes the soup. So in other words, the whole process of formative assessment becomes incredibly important for the summative assessment to be successful. Without this process, very often we will end up with a less than ideal summative assessment. And unfortunately, what we often find ourselves in these times is we've got a broken feedback loop when we are trying to get content, learn more about content. We build content knowledge, because this is essentially what a teacher does, is he builds the content knowledge, or a big part of the role of a teacher, building the content knowledge, and then assessing this content knowledge, and then we give feedback on the assessed knowledge. Now, there's a vital part of the feedback loop that is missing when we do this, because this is now typically we teach, we test, and we give the results of the test. But the problem is, because we are so we're not giving ourselves scope and time for formative assessment, there is no further step that is happening. So this, if we look at the chef's feedback loop, would be similar to adding the ingredients and then just completely skipping this, tasting the ingredients and determining missing elements. So in essence, what's going to happen is the chef will add the ingredients and send it to the diner. And this is what's happening with our, and we'll get feedback from the diner. The diner will tell us, no, the food isn't, the soup wasn't great, because we haven't adjusted it accordingly. Now, when we look at a feedback loop that is a completed thing, we've got our content knowledge that's built, it is being assessed, and we're giving feedback. But now there's an important extra process that needs to happen, and that is the process where we identify missing knowledge, and then we can start this process again. So when we get to this key point, identify missing knowledge. Now, the problem has always been in the past, in order to identify missing knowledge, it's a very labor-intensive practice, because now a teacher has to pick up a red pen and has to mark hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little tests. This is where digital assessment can become an incredibly powerful tool. And I think it's very important that we understand, when we talk about assess here, I'm referring to both formative and summative assessment. But at the same time, we have to make a separation between the two, because a formative assessment and summative assessment will by nature be different. They will not be, it won't necessarily be the same thing. You are not necessarily going to be asking the same questions in a formative assessment that you will be asking in a summative assessment. A simple example that I always like to look at, my own background, I was a high school English teacher, and in order to get learners to write a 400-word essay, which was the summative assessment that they had to do, I very often gave them a 50-mark multiple choice question, which seems like completely disconnected concepts, but the formative assessment, the quiz that they were able to complete, ensured that they had the necessary knowledge, content knowledge, and mastery of the content knowledge to be able to complete the summative assessment. So the two don't need to look the same at all. The one just needs to make sure, formative assessment just needs to make sure that there's slow and gradual improvement that is happening in the learner. And very importantly, that we identify missing knowledge. Now, the problem that we have again, and that we've had in the past, as we spoke, as I've mentioned, is what happens is we end up giving class tests as an example, and the learners write 10 class tests, 20 class tests, however many you want to write, but it becomes very, very difficult and challenging and cumbersome to actually mark those things, to get to the point where you are giving appropriate feedback on it. This is where we want to start using different tools. Now, what Quizlet is, and Quizlet is the first of these tools that we will be looking at. On Thursday, we're going to be looking at what I like to call Quizlet's twin brother, Quizzes. So that's a slightly different tool than one we are looking at today. But what Quizlet essentially is, if we can split it into two ways: the teacher-centered part of it and the learner-centered part of it. Now, one of the unfortunate things about Quizlet, the teacher-centered controls of this a lot of it is restricted to the paid-for version, and that is why when I use Quizlet, I tend to focus more on the learner-centered part of it. But it's important and valuable to have a look at what it is. So what Quizlet is, the teacher is going to play a vital role here as well. Quizlet is built on the idea of learning through key cards. Now, a lot of people like learning in this way. They enjoy the idea of having a term and then a definition. A term and then a definition. So that's basically what we're looking at when we're talking about key cards. It's a term and a definition. So basic concepts are given descriptors, or if you want to call it a term and a definition, which allows the teacher to create a digital representation of a cue card. So just in a very, very straightforward, simple way of teaching, sometimes it is useful for a teacher to have digital cue cards at the ready, and Quizlet does this very well, in a very simple way of creating these cue cards. So if you've got your laptop or your desktop or whatever connected to a whiteboard, connected to the to any kind of presentation, it's very easy and straightforward just to create these cue cards and have that displayed on the whiteboard. So this is a very basic kind of replacement technique that you have of just creating a little bit more engagement with your learners. Then there's further gamification that's built into it. We're not going to really look a lot at the gamification element because I think at this point in time, there are other elements of Quizlet that are more essential for us, but the gamification, as with all of these tools, it allows for greater engagement from students in the class. Any teacher who's ever used something like Kahoot in the class will attest to the fact that the kids enjoy it, they really get into it, and Quizlet can do the same kind of thing. Different games, of course, and I think in terms of gamification, what one also has to understand, the kids very often have a short attention span, so they will get bored of one type of game very quickly and just want to move on to the next thing. So it's good if you like this kind of thing in your class, a lot of gamification, lots of these things. It's good to have a variety of tools that you can use to keep the kids interested. And then I think for a teacher, this is quite a nifty little tool that Quizlet has. If you've built your set, as they call it, of definitions and the terms and definitions, then you can use it to automatically generate a basic test, which you can use then as homework or classwork, which tests whether the key concepts have been learned. So if you want to have a more, if you want to use a more paper-based approach, you can use Quizlet. You create your set, and then through a very simple step, you end up creating a written test that you can print to a PDF. You can print that document, you can turn it into a digital document, however you want to use it. But it's quite a nifty trick that it can do to create this. What's also quite nice is if you create a number of different sets, you can combine these sets and then use the combined sets to create one test. But we'll show you how all of that works a little bit later. In terms of the tracking tools, and I think it's something that one has to understand about Quizlet, and that's also a big reason of why our approach to using this is a little bit different and a more learner-centered thing. There are great learner tracking tools that are built into the system. Learner tracking tools essentially means you can see how the learners are doing on the Quizlet that you've created, which is, of course, any kind of insight that you can have into your learners' learning is an invaluable thing to have. But the learner tracking tools are only active in the paid-for version, so they're not part of the free version of Quizlet. I'm not trying to promote this or sell this or anything like that, but it's just something to take note of. Then the learner-centered, and this is the part of Quizlet that I am a lot more excited about, because when we look at the feedback loop, I'm just gonna jump back to the feedback loop very quickly. When we look at the feedback loop, it's important to note that I've put both the teacher and the learner central to this feedback loop, because when we look at assessment, what we tend to do is we tend to assume that there's only one way to really assess, and that the way to assess is to write a test, the teacher marks it, and then the teachers can see what it looks like. But we have to start broadening this view of things to start incorporating a lot more self-assessment and peer assessment and that kind of thing. And when it comes to self-assessment, that's what we want to focus on today. How we use Quizlet as a consolidation tool that a learner uses for self-assessment, not necessarily for a teacher. Because as we looked at, in terms of the teacher side of things, the teacher can't actually see what the learner has been doing. So a lot of this is about self-assessment for the learners, and cultivating, in my experience, that what I use in the classroom, it's a great tool for cultivating the idea of self-assessment in learners, the idea of not being a passive learner but becoming an active learner. And I think therein lies an invaluable part of this tool. And the same principles can apply. I know I used it in a high school setup, but the same principles can apply to primary school as well, where you create that sense in a learner that they can actually check their own learning and see how they are progressing. So how learner-centered approach works here, while individual learning starts as just a cue card, it becomes increasingly more engaging as the learner can test their own mastery. Now, that's what we're going to dive into in a minute. When you start off with this as a learning tool, it starts off as a cue card. In other words, there's a definition, you click on it, flip over the term, you click on it, it flips over, it gives you a definition. But it becomes increasingly more engaging and increasingly more challenging the more you move through these cue cards. And then the other thing, how it works is key concepts are consolidated through recall and repetition. Using the more challenging modes will be a clear indication if the knowledge has been mastered. So the more challenging it becomes, the more important it becomes that a learner must actually know the concept. For example, when you start off with it, you simply click on multiple choice and select the one that you think is the correct one. But as you progress, you actually need to start typing it out, the term. There's matching elements to it. There's all sorts of different things that really shows whether or not you understand the concept. And the level of the success is largely determined by the learner's willingness to engage with the tool. What I mean by this is what happens here is we create, from a teacher side of things, we create a platform where the learner can learn, where they need to engage with it. The level of success of this thing, it is a learner-driven thing. It is a learner-centered approach to building content knowledge. It's not a teacher-centered approach, because the teacher will create the platform, the teacher will create the conditions, but then it's up to the learner to take the opportunity. So what happens if this works, and it takes a while if learners haven't done this kind of thing, they will take a while to really get used to it. A lot of our learners are very used to being passive, in the sense that they sit and wait to receive instruction rather than going ahead and finding information and learning on their own. But as the use of a tool like this grows, the more that sense grows. And when it becomes at its most exciting is when Quizlet facilitates autonomous learning through learner-created Quizlet classes and sets. So while you as a teacher can create a class, you've also got the option learners have the option to create their own sets. They've got the option to create their own classes and to add their classmates to the session. So in other words, when that starts happening, when they start creating their own sets from their own work and start using that as a tool to determine their learning, it becomes incredibly powerful tool. A simple example that I often like to use is I would set up a basic Quizlet for the learners. I would explain to them how it works, and I would tell them, look, now you've got the class, you can add your own sets to this. And over time, as learners became used to it, they started doing that. And before the exams and the actual summative assessment rolls around, if they go into the class, they'll see, but they've created their own sets that they can then go through each other's sets to see what's going on, how the other person views it, etc., etc. Now, there's also an element there that learners can create sets that are just flat out wrong, but I think there's value in being able to figure out whether or not something is wrong. That's why as a teacher, it's good. You must make your own sets there as well. But I think if the learners start becoming comfortable with making their own ones, the ability to distinguish between what's right and wrong is also, of course, a valuable skill to learn. But this can, of course, be a little bit more tricky. Now, here we get to our slightly more interactive part of things. I asked you to get your to download Quizlet onto your phone, play around with it. You don't actually need to have Quizlet on your phone for this. What I want you to do on your phone, if possible, get your QR scanner and scan this QR code. It will take you to completing your first Quizlet. Right, I'm going to give you a minute or two to actually do that. What I'm also going to do in the chat screen, I'm going to paste the link if you prefer to do it on your desktop. Just remember, if you're going to click on that, you won't leave the meeting. It'll open up a new tab. Just make sure that once you're finished there, that you won't see the presentation until you get back to this tab. Right, so I'm going to give us a minute or two to actually complete or to scratch around in this. Sorry, just quickly scratch around with this tool to see what we can do with it, and then this is also the moment. If you have questions, please, this is now a good time to ask questions while you complete some of your Quizlets. Right, no questions. Very quiet group again. Right, on my side of things, you don't need to, I'll explain it. You can continue if you are busy completing some of these things. But you'll see in the left-hand navigation, yes, I see Gilbert says these are the people that know what they are doing. Obviously, this was a session that was advertised for the people that are a little bit moving ahead. So if you are on Quizlet, you'll see there's the left-hand side, there's a navigation for this Quizlet specifically, and then you've got your cue cards as well. If you click on them, the first one is formative assessment. If you click on it, it gives you definition. So the idea is, first and foremost, one can just go through the flashcards, study them. Right, I see Jocelyn is done. You can just study these flashcards. Please note that if you just click on a link and they're not signed into, they haven't signed into Quizlet yet, then it's going to ask you to register, etc., etc. We're going to get to that in a minute. When it gets more interesting is when we click on Learn. Right. So I'm going to give you another minute or two to play around, and then we're going to get back to the presentation. Are there no questions so far? Right. Just Jocelyn and Jason, when you say done, you mean you went through the learn part of it as well, or just read through the flashcards? Okay, right. So I see Jason played the game, Jocelyn read the flashcards. Right, so that's a good example of if we look at these two, what they did here, it's a good example of how we can actually engage with it in different ways. So flashcards is obviously where the whole thing starts, but the idea is as we move forwards, we're going to start going through the different concepts. Now, when we just click on Learn, and this is where the whole thing starts, obviously. Learn. When a learner engages with this tool, it's very simple. Online tools to engage students and gather data about what students know and don't know. So we'll read this, online tools, This is something like Quizlet and quizzes. And it's going to take me through these different cards. I'm just going to quickly click through them. Not going to really try and get it right. They actually got one right. Got another one right. No, haven't got it right. Informal assessments. So in this way, slowly but surely, I'm moving ahead and I'm seeing whether or not I know what's happening. So when you're done with this, this gives you a feedback of whether or not you know what's going on. There's one that I actually struggle with, and there are 4 of them that I am familiar with, but I haven't actually mastered anything, which is a problem. So I need to obviously look at it. There are only 4 concepts, and I'm struggling with these concepts. So when you press the key to continue, now it starts testing you in a slightly more challenging way. Now I actually have to enter the thing. I can't just click on things anymore to try and enter it as quickly as I want to. So, right, so this is summative. We're going to say, right, so there we go. If they don't know the answer, they've got the option to click on don't know, and it will tell you what it's supposed to be. So in this way, the more they go through it, the more familiar they will become with the terminology, depending on how you want to put this whole thing together. Right, so I think what we're going to do, let's just return to the set. So the learn is one of the key parts of really moving ahead with this thing, using the tool effectively. When we talk about gamification, we've got the match and the gravity. Now, this is quite a fun thing if you're doing it in a computer lab, to use match as an example. If there aren't if there aren't too many things, yeah, you can make it a game out of it, a challenge. Who can complete their thing first? So the idea is just simply to drag and match your different tools. But what you'll often get is people do exactly what I'm doing now. They'll just click and drag and hope for the best and see what the time is then. Now, for this reason, I like to have, when I do this, there needs to be lots of examples. See, I beat Jocelyn, it seems, 17 seconds, but she actually was reading this stuff and I was just clicking and dragging. So that's why this mode of play, it works best if you have lots of examples, that they can't just click and drag and hope for the best. But that's also the problem with lots of these gamifications. We don't read, we just click and drag and hope for the best. Now, gravity is a lot more challenging. In gravity, you actually have to, you'll see there's terminology that's floating in, and you need to type the name of whatever is on this thing quick enough to stop it. So this is, right, so now you're supposed to go in it. Right, so anyway, you get the idea. This one is a bit more challenging to, this is assessment for learning anyway. But the gamification element of it is obviously a nice tool that you can use in your classroom. In terms of the learner-centered approach, and they can play this as well, of course. If they can get those things right, if they can do the gravity thing especially, then you know they know what's going on, and you know they can read quite quickly. When we get to write, I think this is often one of the best examples of whether they truly know what's happening there. And this is part of the whole learning process, when they need to write the term, read the term, and then write out the term to understand what it is. So I'm not going to go through all of these things now. What we want to dive into is how do we actually create these sets? Now, creating a set, they've actually made it very easy. There's a number of tools that added to this to make the whole system very effective. But what's also something to take note of is you can search as well. So we could have searched for anything that we wanted to. So for example, formative assessment, if I wanted to use a different quiz for this, I should just spell it correctly, then we'll find lots of different examples over here that we could look at to use. So yes, I didn't write it correctly now, so it's not going to give the correct one. We're looking for sets, and here we go. We could find sets here because I just need to spell it correctly, and you'll see once we start looking for the sets, there's lots of examples over here. Right, and there are, of course, ones that cost money, but there's a ton of them that are free, that you really don't need to find ones that cost money. Now, when we create our own sets, right, so we click on create, straightforward. We're going to call this one Yeah, I was busy with this one earlier. Let me just create the blank one. Right, so here we've got a blank set. Again, one of the things that they try and do is that there's always little bits and pieces that they try and sell to you. So let's say, for example, what we want to do here is we're going to create a very straightforward set where we're going to compare simple, complex, and compound sentences. So this is something that learners, if you're a language teacher, you'll know learners struggle endlessly with something like this. So this is a useful little thing for them to just have a look at the actual Quizlet and then to try and consolidate some of the concepts. So when we set up our Quizlet, everything is set up with just the term and the definition, term and definition. Now, they've made it incredibly easy for you to do this in the sense that you can actually, if you type simple sentence, if you click on definition, what it will do is it will match previous examples and see if it has this saved somewhere, and it'll give you a few options. A sentence consisting of one independent clause and no dependent clauses. And that's correct. I can click it, I can use it if I want to use it, I can change some of it. If I want to change independent clause to coordinating conjunctions, etc., you can do it like that. So it actually gives you, once you type if you type the term and then it'll give you a definition. So they've got simple sentence, I've got complex sentence, and I click on definition, and it gives me a few examples. And that one looks right. And here I click on compound sentence, and then it gives me an example. Right. So again, you can go edit it, you can change it any way that you want to. Now, when you start editing it, just note there's this little box over here that you'll be very tempted on clicking, because you see I can change fonts, I can change colors. There's even a microphone, so I could add a voice recording. Unfortunately, these things are on the teacher edition, so this is part of the paid for version. The images, another thing that's a little bit annoying. Upload your own image is also locked. You can't use this, so they'll give you examples. They'll give you examples that you could be using that matches your term. For the most part, and you'll see later why I say this, I prefer not to use these images because I like to be able to create tests from my sets, and these images don't work that well when it comes to that. Right, so here I've created a simple, complex, compound sentence, and it just added these extra ones. We want to delete it. We're not looking at having that many. If you want more, you can continue to add card, as many as you feel like. I'm not sure, there might be a limitation, but I haven't run into that limitation yet. So if you know of it, please tell me. Then one or two things you can keep in mind here when you when you create your Quizlet, you can decide, should it be visible to everyone, only editable by me. So depending on how we want to use it, visible to everyone, certain classes, just me. So we're going to get to the classes in a minute. You can have users with a password or just me. So if you want to make sure that your users log in using a password, you can do it this way, or you can say just me to limit the view to only you, or you can just make it visible to your classes. For the most part, I'm generally like to contribute to the digital resources out there. So I always set things to everyone so that it is discoverable by anyone. And then editable, I'm going to keep just me. If you are multiple teachers working on the same Quizlet and you actually want to be able to edit each other's work, then it might be a useful idea to have users with a password. But for the most part, we're just going to leave it like that. Then what you are also required to do is select the language of the Quizlet itself. So you can say English, but please note you can actually also select Afrikaans as a language you could select. Where is that? All the way down here at the bottom. Xhosa is also a language you can select. So you can actually you can actually define it, the language in that way. I'm not 100% sure. I think in the search you will see what languages things used. So it's a useful little thing to be able to do. We're going to set it to English, very simple, and we want to create our study set. Here we've got our study set. And when you share your study set, there's different ways of sharing it. You can simply copy the link. This is very often, most digital resources that you use will have this way of sharing it. So exactly what I did, I just shared a link with you, and you got that link, and you were able to complete the Quizlet. So you can take that link and you can use it in any different way. If you're creating a hyperdoc, you can use it in your hyperdoc. If you want to paste it in a WhatsApp chat, you can do that. If you want to create a QR code out of it, you can do that. You've got a hyperlink that'll take you to that. That'll take you to this Quizlet. Quizlet works very, very well when you're linking it to your Google Classroom. So you've got an option to share on Google Classroom, which will just basically paste this link on a Google Classroom once you've connected it to a Google Classroom. So easy, straightforward way of connecting the two. And once I've created my set, it becomes a straightforward tool, just like we had in the other one, simple sentence, complex sentence, with all the different features added here at the bottom. Now, when we want to create another set, this is another trick I want to show you that works really, really well when creating these sets. Now, when sorry, let me just want to quickly organize my windows here again, because I think this is useful to see. When the next set that I want to create, I want to create a set where I'm of parts of speech. No, you can't see anything. Let me get there now. Right. So what I've got here, this is my parts of speech that I've already set up. Very straightforward. Noun, the name of a person, place, thing, or idea, pronoun, etc., etc. So what I've done is I've got the term, and then I've got the definition. Now you can do the same thing if you're doing it in something like Excel or Sheets. You can have that your one column is the term, the next column is the definition. That one requires a little bit more setup. But if you've got your thing set up like this, and you want to create your new study set, there's an option that they say import from Word, Excel, Google Docs, etc. If you do that, it brings up a window that looks like that, and you'll see there's a few options here when they say import your data. Word 1, definition 1, Word 2, definition 2. So if you've got only terminology, so the one we did here at the top, if I'm, for example, going to paste these ones, simple sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence, what happens here is I don't have definitions added, but between the cards, it's a new line. So what will happen is a long list of things that I have. If I paste it here, every single new line will be seen as a new card. So if I were to do that, I've got my terms already entered, and I can literally click on definition and it'll find the definition for it. So as an example, let's say I'm going to use characters from Romeo and Juliet, which is a very useful thing to do. And we just add these characters. So I'm going to create these 3 cards. I'm going to import. Now I've got the name, I've got the term without the definition, but I can click over here and it'll give me a few examples. Now these aren't great ones, but we can just say son of Montague, Juliet, she's the daughter of Capulet, and Capulet is the patriarch of the Capulet family, father of Juliet, etc. So, okay, this is a very long example, but this will give you an idea of some of the things that you can do with this system. So, but just to go back, what we wanted to do is we actually wanted to paste the term and definition. So if I've got my term and definition already set up, it's as straightforward as copying and pasting. And all that I need to do now is I need to make sure I'm not using the normal a tab or a comma. I'm using a hyphen. I tell it the hyphen is the thing that separates it. And you'll see there's the noun and the definition immediately created. There we go. Now we've got all 9 parts of speech ready to go as a Quizlet. And I'm just going to call it parts of speech. and it is done. And we just need to make sure, I often forget this, they want you to just choose your language. Once you've done that, you can create our new Quizlet. Right, now, same way we can share it in any way that we want to. There we go. Now, when we want to share it, what I prefer to do than sharing it as a link every time, because you can do it like that, but what I prefer to do is to actually create a class. Now, when you create a class, this one, when you create a class, what happens is learners join the class, and all the sets, you load sets into a class, which just makes it a lot easier for them to access if there's going to be multiple sets that they need to access. So it's a good idea to create a class. So we're going to call this one sample class, and we're going to create the class. Where it says select a school, I've already added the Cape Winelands Education District. Very often, it's very possible that you won't find your school there. It really is as simple as entering your school's name, and that's it. And then it automatically creates this on the system. Nothing more. They don't need contact details. They don't need anything else. You just enter the school's name. It's just a way for them to kind of try and keep track of teachers in a school. So once you've added the school, others will be able to find that school again, and they will join. They will simply join it. Right. So sample class, we create our class, and then when we've created a class, like with all of these different tools, now we need to start adding members to the class. Right. Again, Quizlet works very well with Google Classroom, so you can connect with Google Classroom. What connect with Google Classroom does in essence, it's not a plugin that is an add-on to your classroom or anything like that. What it does is it's simply going to pick one of your classes. So we'll pick our dummy class and we'll send invitation. So essentially, it goes to your Google Classroom. It gets a list of email addresses that it can use, and it sends invitations to all of those people. Now, the one thing that I didn't discuss now or show you, when you register for Quizlet the first time, you can just simply use a Google account. So if your learners are already on a Google Classroom, then they'll be using their Google accounts to be on that classroom. They can just use that same Google account to connect to Quizlet, and then they will be able to easily jump onto your class. So if you've got a Google Classroom, Quizlet becomes a great extension for that. And we'll just send our invitations, and the one person has been invited to my classroom. And all that I do now is I add my different sets. I'm going to add my parts of speech, and I want to add my simple, complex, and compound. I'm not going to allow the class to edit my sets. I want them to use the sets that I have as I have them. And let's close, and you'll see there are the sets that we have. Right, they've been set up. Now you'll see something that we really want to be able to click on, view class progress. That'll take you to a window that asks you to upgrade your Quizlet account. So you can't, unfortunately, track the class progress. And this is why when we spoke about the different levels of use of this, the focus for me when we look at Quizlet is using it as a learner-centered tool, a tool where they can go on and they can use it to go through different concepts that you load up for them here. When you want them to join the class, if you don't have individual email addresses, it generates a code for you that you can, or sorry, not a code. It generates a URL that you can use, that you can just copy and send that to them. So if you are using WhatsApp as an example, as a communication tool, you can copy that, paste it into WhatsApp, and tell them, go here, register an account, and then join the Quizlets, and then they can start having access to these different Quizlets. Now, I should double check if I think I've got this. Okay, so sorry, I just want to go back here. Now, sorry, was there a question? Okay. So if we go back to our sample class now. Right, sorry. If we go back to our sample class now, if we go into parts of speech as an example, right? Now we've got what I spoke about earlier was the ability to create a test out of this. So if I click on test, and this is now the printable version of it. So if I wanted to, sorry, something else we need to just, before we get into that, when we want to create a Quizlet as well, so I've completely skipped this part of it. Let's say, for example, we want to create a Quizlet on, spoke about it, Romeo and Juliet, because we want to make sure that they learn the character names, that they don't get confused between who's a Capulet, who's a Montague, as an example. Now, you'll see some of these are a little bit intimidating. Here's 102 terms for Romeo and Juliet. So if you add this, for example, learners will take a long time to work through it. I'm not a big fan of Quizlets that are that loaded with things. I prefer shorter ones, but it really depends on what you prefer. So this one looks quite nice. We've got our characters, Mercutio, Romeo and Juliet, 16 terms. Now, if you want to use this one, you can click on this one. It'll take you to the Quizlet. And if I want to use this exact one, we have the option to just simply click on plus, and we add it to our class. And then we don't need to do anything else. It's already been created. However, if you are like me, you want to be able to tweak the thing slightly that it fits your needs. Now, the Quizlets by default have this setting activated. This is how it's discoverable. Anyone can go and click on the option of customize. When you click on customize, what essentially happens is it makes a copy of that set, a complete copy of that set. The only difference is now it becomes editable, and you've got access to it to change the thing around. So now we've got Mercutio, Romeo, Juliet, Benvolio, Tybalt, Paris, the nurse, Peter, Prince, Lord Capulet, Lord Montague, Friar Lawrence, Rosaline, Verona, Lady Capulet, the whole lot, all in there. And this is a very nice, useful tool to make sure that the learners just know the character names and know some of the basic things that they need to know. However, let's say for argument's sake, I like all of this, but we've got lots of character names here. I don't see how Verona fits in here. I just want to delete this card. That's it. I like 15 questions. This works for me. There we go. Now I've changed it around. I've done what I wanted to do. I'm happy. This thing works for me. I'm going to create it. And I've literally taken one that's already been created and just changed it slightly into my own Quizlet. Again, I've got the option. I've got a link. I can share it on Classroom. All of those things that I want to do. And importantly, I can add to a class or a folder. So if I add it to my sample class, we're going to just add it there. So it's been added there. And I go back to my classes, sample class. Now I've already loaded in these three different sets for the learners to work through. There's parts of speech, simple, complex, compound, and we've got Romeo and Juliet as well. These different things that different Quizlets that they can access. Now, what we spoke about when we spoke about the test part that is very useful. If I open up the Quizlet and I go to test, and I feel like setting a very quick basic class test, we're going to have this be a written test, and we want them to be able to, we're going to turn this into a PDF that we're going to print and we're going to send to our learners. Now you'll see why I said earlier that I'm not necessarily a fan of adding images to the Quizlet. It depends again on the use of it, because now I've got these little images as part of my test that I don't necessarily want. The digital test is of course very nice, but again, we can't collect the feedback from this. We won't be able to see how the kids actually did in this test. So if you want to actually see what's going on, you can make a print out of this and you can give it to them. If you are a little bit more industrious, you can turn it into an editable PDF that they need to complete. You can mark it digitally, but it's a lot more complicated. I'm not going to go into how you do that now. but these are options that you have. What's nice about this test is if you click on the options, you'll see it's going to give you a certain number of questions. You want to ask 15 questions in total, and we can give them written questions, matching questions, multiple choice, true or false, show images. So if you want to create a very quick to mark kind of thing, just to check if what's going on, we'll remove the written. We're just going to leave matching multiple choice, true and false. And we want to, oh, sorry, it has the images, show images option. I forgot about that part. Right, so they need to answer with the term, not the definition. This way around is often, it just doesn't work well. So matching multiple choice, true or false. We've given them that. And it's going to generate a quiz for the test for me. Right, sorry, I just want to... Right, now we create the new test. So you'll see 5 matching questions. They've got the 5 terms and the 5 definitions, multiple choice. You've got 5 multiple choice questions, and then they've got 5 true or false questions. If we say print test, now, I don't think you're going to see this, but just give me a second. I'm just going to quickly generate this test. So if you print the test, you can choose your destination. You can save it straight to Google Drive, or you can actually print it out if you want to, depending on the use that you have for it. If you want the printed version, then obviously quite useful. So from a teacher side of things, it is nice to be able to generate these tests that you can still get feedback. So just to show you what it looks like, there's my PDF now. It likes using a lot of paper. As you can see, it's quite big. So you can take this PDF, you can convert it to a Google Doc, and you've got your quiz that's been set up for you. And it's a quick to mark one because it's only multiple choice. So if you want to mark this by pen, or you want to have them answer this question quickly, swap with the guy next to them, or swap with their classmates, mark it. How you actually implement the tool is entirely up to you. But just to show you that you can actually generate a very quick and easy little test based on your definitions or your term and definition that you've created. So I like to use this little trick. I use it quite often, and if you really want to, you can turn it into something that is just a multiple choice test. So if we're back here again, I'm going to generate just a multiple choice, but we want to make it nice and short. We're only going to, well, let's make it 15. It gives you a multiple choice test like that, right? Now, if you then want to go further, and we'll look at how we can do that on Wednesday, on Thursday, in Thursday's session, you could take this and you could then port it into a different platform. So you can then take this and put it into a Google Forms, or you can put it into a quizzes, or you can put it into something else where it becomes something that does do learner tracking for you, depending on how you want to go about using it. But again, that's more of the teacher side of things. So from a learner side, they still use this thing in the way that we've used it the whole time. Now, one of the last things that I want to show you is where will we go for this? Let's go back to our sample class. All right, let's go to simple, complex, compound. So if we want to create something that is a bit more complicated than just this, we've only got our 3 terms in here: simple sentence, complex sentence, compound sentence. But we want to be able to create one of those tests as an example. This is now not for just learning, but this is now to make it a little bit more challenging for the learners. Let's say, for example, we've got 4 or 5 different sets that we want to be able to combine. We have an option. Sorry, let me go back here quickly. We have this option where we go to when we click on the more options to say combine, right? When we combine, now we select the different sets that we want to add. So we want to add parts of speech. We're going to add figures of speech. So, and we want to create, let's say we're going to create a test. right? So now we're combining the sets and we're creating a test out of this. So go. Now we've got a total of 19 terms that we're actually using. So there are 19 questions all in total. It says there's some duplication, but that obviously won't necessarily work. So in other words, you've got different types of sets. Now we will have 19 questions. We just want to do a little quick multiple choice and true or false type of assessment that we can print out and we can give our learners. We're going to create a new test. And here I've got my multiple choice questions, my 7 multiple choice questions. I've got 9 true or false questions. And I can then do this. I can use this as a tool that the kids have to complete digitally, or I can again do a printout of this. Now, the nice thing is everything that I'm showing to you in terms of combining and creating sets and all of that is available to both the learner and the teacher. So once learners become familiar with the platform, they can start creating their own learning. They can use the tools at their disposal to create their own learning opportunities. So if they feel comfortable with a variety of work, then they can say, look, I'm going to challenge myself now, and I want to include 5 or 6 different sets and create my own test using these different sets. And I'm only going to use a very complicated way of asking it. I don't want to use multiple choice. I'm in fact going to use only the written. So for me, written is always the most challenging part of it, because now they need to actually write out the word and get it correct. And there's 16 questions, so 16 terms defining whether or not they know it. Again, how you use this, how you apply it in your class is entirely up to you. But the bottom line is to try and find a way where you incorporate it into your way of getting learners to consolidate content, making sure that they are able to take the knowledge, to take the information, and to put it, or basically to really learn those definitions, the terms specifically. That it really is a tool that once you start implementing it in your whole learning practice can be very, very transformative in the way that your learners go about learning, because you're facilitating a learning environment that goes beyond just just waiting for the teacher. I think that's the key thing for me using the digital assessment tools. It eliminates that whole problem that we have where a learner needs to wait for a teacher before they know whether or not they got something right or wrong. And what I like about something like Quizlet, for me personally, what really works well is just how quick and easy it is to set up a set. So with that said, because it is quick and easy to set up a set, as part of the training today, and this is now going to be an opportunity for you to both ask questions and to go and create your own sets. Now I'm going to ask you, please, one of the sets that you create, you can use, or you need to create from scratch using your own terms and descriptions, and then we can create a second one where we use where we just import things, where we find a Quizlet that we like and we use things from that. Now, part of this training, because this training falls into a slightly different bracket, we added an element where we look at evidence that learning has taken place. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share I think the easiest is just to paste the link in the chat, a link to a Google form. You can't really get going with it yet, because part of that Google form is just requires 2 submissions: a URL code to a Quizlet that you've created from scratch, and then a URL to a Quizlet that you've actually imported and just modified slightly. I'm not going to know how much you've modified it. You will be the only person who knows that. This is one of those examples where we often tell the learners, you're going to be the only one who loses out if you don't do this thing, if one doesn't do this exercise properly. So I'm going to paste this link in the chat, I'm going to give you a good while to go and create your first Quizlet, to set up your first your Quizlet. As I said, it asks for two URLs, one that you've created yourself and one that you've imported. And this is now the opportunity that you have to ask questions. Please fire away if there are any things that you're uncertain about. If there is nothing that you want to ask, please just show me a thumbs up or an indication that you're still with us. Or are you all busy creating your Quizlets?
There are two questions
Okay,
in the chat, Jaco.
Right. Terence, referring to the use of this? Yes, Anita, you can use this time to create it now. If you don't finish the session, I'll get back to your question now, Terence. If you can't finish it now, I think now is a good opportunity to create it, because if you get stuck with something, then you can ask, and if you're uncertain how to do it. Terence, referring to the can you use it offline? Again, unfortunately, the offline functionality is one of those paid for features. So ideally, this works very well on, that's why I said the app is a nice thing to get, because the app is not very data intensive at all, especially if you make sure that you don't use pictures. So it does use some mobile data, but it also works very well in something like a computer lab, anything like that. So the offline functionality of it, it does exist, but it requires you to upgrade the learner accounts so that they can download it for offline use.
Another question in the chat, Jaco.
Right. At this point in time, Anita, I haven't given a specific deadline. I will communicate a specific deadline via email when we send the recording. If we need to set a specific deadline, we'll do that when we send that email. And again, remember, there will be a recording of this entire session that you can rewatch if you get stuck, if there are things that you forget, because as with all these webinars, there's a lot of information that we share. So the best way to use all of this is always go watch the video again, pause, try it, play again, pause, try it, play again. What I'm also going to show you quickly, if you if you have a look on your on the presentation again, you'll see what I've shown you there is the mobile app, right? So this is now just my class. So what typically is going to happen is if your learners start joining your sessions, or your classes at least, When they open up Quizlet, they get to a welcome screen that looks like this. Now you can set it between the dark and the bright display if you want to, where they turn it from essentially a bright white screen versus a dark screen, if you feel like it. But when you go into, if you open this up and you click on your classes, you'll see you can simply click on sample class. It opens up the sample classes, and then I select whichever one I want to complete. So let's say, for example, we want to do parts of speech. I just click on parts of speech, and it takes me to the first and foremost, just the cue cards, where we've got the noun that I can flip to the definition, and then go to the next one and flip again. So in this way, we kind of learn how the whole thing works. And then we've got all of these different tools. We can do the learn, flashcards, write, match, test. The only thing that's not available on the mobile device is the gravity function. Right, now remember, again, one of the things that sometimes gets confusing for people is Quizlet is not a quiz tool at all, because I think therein lies a lot of confusion. Because if the learner opens this up, the first thing they'll see when they start scrolling down is they'll actually see all the answers to the questions. So in that sense, it's not a quiz tool. It is a tool that consolidates content. But if they go into learn, for example, which is, I think, probably the most powerful part of this tool, they'll see that multiple choice part where the name of the person, place, thing, or an idea, that is a noun, and they can move through it. Now, you'll be amazed how learners enjoy being able to do this shortly before they write the test, just to quickly double check if they've got all the little terms correct and in place.